At some point, legacy media got smart about digital. Once it's figured out for everybody, and you lose that edge. That's the thing about digital. It lowers the barrier to entry, like anyone can do a podcast, anyone can do a newsletter. The strength, of course, of legacy is brand. It turns out brand matters a lot, and it takes time. You have to be out there, you have to be consistent, you have to know your audience, and you have to be giving them valuable information over a long period of time. You can't speed run a brand.
Today, we're diving deep into a topic that's reshaping everything from boardrooms to newsrooms, the impact of artificial intelligence on media and content businesses. And who better to guide us through this than our guest, Pete Pachal. Pete is a longtime tech journalist, the founder of the Media Copilot, a newsletter, podcast, and training academy focused on how AI is changing media, journalism, and the news. He's covered technology for over 2 decades and has been following AI since before predictive text was commonplace. He's worked in senior editorial and strategy roles at major media companies like Mashable, Time, CoinDesk, and he understands the priorities of media companies and the areas where generative AI can make the most difference. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your background is fascinating. You've been covering technology for an absurdly long time, even before the original .com boom. It seems like you're able to find right place at the right time with the next big thing that's happening. And you've spent a significant part of 2010s at Mashable experimenting with the digital media strategies. Then you moved into more strategic roles at other media companies. Can you tell the audience and our listeners what this journey's been like how you have just been lucky enough to find yourself constantly at the intersection of technology, data, digital, and disruption?
So I don't really consider myself that lucky. I just kind of, I guess I am a bit lucky in that I ended up just sort of following my passions and sort of stuff I wanted to write about and found interesting. And I was lucky that people sort of found it interesting. And I was fortunate to find good work at places like NBC Universal, and I did a blog for them right when like tech was really kind of a cool thing to be talking about. So like this is the late 2000s, and I was working there when the iPhone first came out, and there was, just everyone was talking about gadgets and smartphones and whatever. So it was great to sort of do something there and run a site for them, because if you're an editor of a site, it sort of gets you a seat at certain tables. And I was able to sort of leverage that into other media roles at PC Mag and at Mashable, and then eventually at CoinDesk. I spent most of the 2010s at Mashable, and that was a really great place to be for that time. So it was a really super interesting time for digital media. Everyone was predicting that BuzzFeed and Vice and Mashable and all these other brands were going to kind of eat the media space and end up, kind of being the CNN and the New York Times and everything else for a new generation. That turned out not to be the case, as we found out, a few years back. But it was an amazing time for just doing experimental things in all kinds of formats, understanding like how the internet was really changing distribution, like social and video platforms, and SEO and newsletters were all kind of relatively new, or at least being reborn in certain ways. So you end up doing everything as a senior editor at one of these places. So that's really where I sort of cut my teeth as kind of a digital strategist, I would say, even though like running a site for NBC like sort of first whetted my appetite there. But I went on to do stuff with CoinDesk, and then let me tell you, like, digital media was kind of crazy, but holy cow, crypto media was another level. And that was really fun in a different way, kind of a roller coaster. But my role at CoinDesk was purely strategic, and I was there for a few years. And so it was really interesting to sort of work out what can be a successful digital strategy for a brand like that. That was probably a little more niche, probably a little more B2B. And we tried a bunch of different things there, plus Web3. And one of the last things I worked on when I was in my time at CoinDesk was AI, because ChatGPT had just sort of taken the world by storm. It was very apparent this was going to change media. And, I was just like, okay, we got to figure this out. And So I sort of assembled a team there, created an AI committee. We developed some guidelines on how to use it. Those are actually still on the site. And I started prototyping some use cases with the team there. So when my time at CoinDesk came to an end, I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I took some time, and then I was like, okay, I know I like AI. I like doing that for CoinDesk, and my specialty is media from all my experience. And I was like, I basically just gave myself a job and started doing a newsletter and examining the intersection of AI and media. A lot of people seemed to like it. I got a lot of subscribers pretty quickly. People started reaching out to me about uh, just coming in and explaining AI to them. That went super well. That pretty quickly translated into a teaching business. And, you described it as kind of an AI academy, which is kind of accurate. Like I do a lot of trainings for both journalists and PR and comms, and on top of that I do just a little bit of consulting in terms of like figuring out strategy for these companies, and sometimes even some tool build. So it's kind of been all AI all the time. And I sort of proudly dog food a lot of it, in the sense that I use a lot of AI to run the business, help with things like content and reversioning things, and really just constantly are teaching myself these new tools and figuring out how they sort of fit in a media workflow or media strategy.
You and I have a lot of similarities, actually, in terms of the career path, but even just what you just said is eating the dog food, and while you're
Mm.
trying to help people with things that we're all learning at the same time. So I have a question though about Mashable. You said something really interesting, and I've seen this materialize a few times in the media space, and I'm sure you have too, where it's like, oh, these new up and comers are going to just kill the incumbents, and they're dead in the water. Well, the incumbents are still there. It's a little surprising because you're at a startup, they're more agile, there's funding, there's more creativity, it takes shorter times to make decisions, you can test things out. Like, what happened? Why do you think that did not materialize?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, to your point, Mashable and others sort of fancying themselves the CNN of millennials, and turns out the CNN for millennials was CNN. And at CoinDesk, we were like thinking about we're going to be the Bloomberg for crypto, and it turns out the Bloomberg for crypto is Bloomberg. So I think that's informative, because at some point, and this was probably pretty early in the life cycle of scale media, digital media, brands like Mashable and others, legacy media got smart about digital. And so, as nimble as you can be and experimental as you can be, all of that's true. And it was true at Mashable. Like we were doing things with, say, live mobile video before anybody was doing it. Once it's figured out for everybody, and you lose that edge. And it's not particularly hard to make a pivot like that. That's the thing about digital. It lowers the barrier to entry, which is often that's cited as an enabler for independence. Like anyone can do a podcast, anyone can do a newsletter, blah blah blah. But actually, like, it also lowers the barrier of entry for the people at the top. They don't have to risk as much by getting a good team to throw together something like a podcast. So you can get something like the New York Times creating the daily very quickly, and it rocketing to the top of the charts and just crowding out everyone else. And the strength, of course, of legacy is brand. They have a brand that is extremely resilient. It turns out brand matters a lot, and it takes time. That's the one thing you can't, crash assemble and just do a speed run on. You can't speed run a brand. You have to be out there, you have to be consistent, you have to know your audience, and you have to be giving them valuable information over a long period of time. And only then will you sort of start to get that benefit. And that's just something nimble and cool as startups are, and I love working for them. They just can't create overnight.
Well, first of all, I can't agree with you more. And I just literally furiously took notes. I think this is an incredibly salient part of this podcast, is just what you said right there. If it was worth it, it was for that. But One
Oh,
is
thank you.
it drives me
It's the first time
bananas.
for me too.
Yeah. Well, it drives me bananas. Like, oh, let's launch an event. Let's launch a
Right.
newsletter. Let's launch a media brand. Like, they have no idea. One is how brand counts. It's not, brand does count. And I think brand is going to, and we'll talk about this later in the podcast, is going to be the salvo in a way for many of these legacy media companies as it relates to AI. Brand's going to come back hot and strong because of trust.
Mhm.
So I think but I think also I put in
Agreed.
my notes is the machine and the brand equals scale, money, and the audience.
There you go. I
You
like
know,
that. Good formula.
so good news for legacy. I think history should people should learn from history. So I think that is you've got some really good insights there.
Right. And again, like the point, it's an obvious point, but the on the other side of things, like I said, the barrier to entry, the lower barrier to entry helps independent creators too. And from that, they can use the short sort of time scale of that edge to establish an audience. And if they are talented enough, there is enough of an apparatus to actually build something around either a single individual or a small group of people, and we're seeing that much more, right? To the point where like it can be lucrative enough that talented people, and talent is the differentiator here, you can't just sort of assemble these things and just hope something poofs out. But if you're a talented individual and become sort of a subject matter expert in your area, or already are one, a lot of people who had created their expertise at major media brands have gone out on their own. You can build something sustainable. Again, if you're dedicated to the craft, if you're consistent about it, you are kind of a brand. I mean, that's not a new observation, but it kind of works the same way in the individuals and sort of in reverse. So this is sort of cementing another sort of truism that I've been observing for years, but it's sort of doubly true now, and I think even more so as AI takes over, is that it's those sort of big legacy incumbents that are going to succeed, as well as like sort of people who are more niche, very sort of individual or smaller operations. And it's like sort of the folks in the middle who might be have tried scale and sort of more general brands during that sort of glorious period of digital media for a while. They're going to have the hardest time, and then where we're starting to see this with things like brands like Business Insider, right? Not to kick on them or anything, but they just had a round of layoffs. They're repositioning their strategy. It's a difficult thing. I mean, if anyone has a chance, they do, because they had a really successful exit in the middle of that era. But we'll see how it shakes out for them and for that brand and others like it.
No, for sure. And actually, I actually would applaud Barbara Peng from Business Insider for making it's a very bold, scary move, actually, and it needs to be done because it is absolutely business model, transformation, and just based on that, I think I think we're hitting on something pretty relevant here. Is the difference between the Mashable era and where we are now? Is that one is speed and two is as a legacy media company, you're going to have to let go of revenue streams and focus on
Right.
new ones. And so you have to not be afraid of the risk.
Mhm.
And that talent, you're going to have to be able to attract top tier talent. And you're going to have to look at like the way you acquire and train and keep talent very differently than the old days. You still could sell digital and move into digital with a lot of the same infrastructure you had before. Yeah, there were some tweaks, but it was still advertising revenue,
Mhm.
right? We're still
Yeah.
selling it, the same way.
Yeah, it's having that long-term vision to not go for the easy stuff now and invest in the traditional metrics. And there's such a hangover from that era of continuing to be almost obsessed with things like page views, unique visitors, which are sometimes called like vanity metrics. And but more to the point, it's not first party data, which is where and what is first party? I mean, that's an industry term, but it's like you want a relationship with the people who are coming to your site, and you want them to come back. You want your talent and if it's whether it's a single person or a big operation, to actually be interacting with them, keeping them coming back, helping them, like learning from them to guide your content and your strategy. Like, what are they into? Like, good example right now that is being just figured out is these AI experiences that a lot of sites are experimenting with. So, for example, Time Magazine, keep calling it magazine. I don't know why I call it, like, it is a magazine, but it's mostly a media brand. Time um, will basically, they do the Time AI, and they're really investing in their on-site experience with that, which is really interesting. And they're getting, obviously, clearly a lot of information from the people that use it, and crafted it around that. But at the same time, there's a larger layer to AI. Obviously, people use ChatGPT, Perplexity, all these portals to find information too, and Time has deals and with some of those companies. So it's a little bit like, well, we don't know yet if readers are going to want to do that sort of just that top level stuff. Like, I don't even want to go to websites anymore, or newsletters or apps. I just want bots to tell me things, or do I have such a relationship with this brand that I want to actually have some AI experience there? But they're sort of boldly sort of going in like, well, we're going to bet on this and experiment on and see if that is a thing, because if it does become a thing, we don't want to be like so far behind that we need to depend on these tech platforms for that.
Hmm.
It's not even distribution almost, because when you're talking about disintermediating agents, but that at some point that's going to be a really major way people are finding information. It's clearly on the rise. So just sort of figuring out that equation and just sort of making sure you've got that eye on the long term, that whichever way that ends up being the thing, you've got some stakes on either path, and that takes a long term vision.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just on that, like, it just rang in my head when you said that it's not having agents to help your customers engage and improve their journey with you, whether it's digital, live, or whatever. It's like not having a search bar in your website,
Yeah.
or an app to figure out where to go at an event. It's the new way people are figuring out how to optimize, experiences and workflow.
Yeah, and
Uh,
to the point of like it being an investment, like it's a major area of focus for them right now. Like I imagine like a whole ton of like executive time, product time, even time on the editorial team is spent sort of thinking about how are we going to do this. And I'll bet the revenue is nascent, like
mhm.
if next to nothing. I mean, yeah, they're getting some licensing revenue from OpenAI and whatever else, but I'm sure they're still making a good chunk of their money from just traditional ads and certainly events. They've moved very aggressively into that space. So, but they're spending a lot of time figuring out AI because it is just so clear this is the future. So that's kind of the hard decisions at media companies today in terms of like, where are you going to spend your time and what are you going to nurture and grow? Because it's definitely not CPM advertising, right? Like that's going to be important, and you need to obviously keep the lights on. But that sort of idea of Google's just going to send you a bunch of people who Google information that you write about. I mean, it's going to send some, but that's going to slowly but surely, shrink and shrink and shrink.
Oh, it's well. One is that train's left the station, so
Yeah.
we got to figure out a new model. But interestingly enough, I hate to say it, or I'd love to say it, is Jessica Sibley, another awesome female CEO,
Hmm.
and she's not
Absolutely.
only doing the AI investment, she's basically turned Time, as you said, Time Magazine into Time Inc.
Right.
Right, and it's really moving into a B2B arena. That convergence of B2C and B2B, which is a result of this business transformation, or business model reinvention, is like we're feeling it everywhere. I mean, I think I even heard like CNN now has got B2B, like they're offering B2B account-based marketing programming. Like it's fascinating.
Yeah. B2B is like a really, I think, increasingly important um, part of media for myriad reasons. But the one I'm obviously most focused on is AI. So this sort of touches into the whole nitty gritty of what I sort of just call SEO for chatbots. And it's sometimes called AIEO or LLMO, or I don't know. They haven't decided yet on what we're going to call this. But like getting your information, being the most cited within an AI summary. And so it's like, okay, so how do you do that? Well, we're progressing beyond just sort of the snake oil aspect of it, and I think we're starting to get a few more insights as to sort of what matters. And one of the things that matters is citations. So this is similar to links, but it's not links per se. You don't need a link just to be cited somewhere and to have a brand or an individual or something cited on a website that matches a pattern, a narrative pattern that an LLM is seeing online and can sort of take that into account. Um, so that's becoming an important thing. The thing is, LLMs, to some extent, can see if a site is like credible or not, and this requires programming, prompting, and making sure that it's not just taking any old, disinformation feed that's just putting out stuff. Hopefully, even though there's a little evidence that has been sort of been able to steer LLMs, but surely they're tuning them to make sure there's credible information. And then, so if that's the case, then, well, what is a credible site, right? How does an LLM tell? Well, does it have a long history of publishing this? Are the bylines matching with real people? Are those people considered experts in other places? And again, this is not me as an engineer. This is me as sort of like just sort of my surmisal of how you would do that. But it is like, so who has that expertise? What is already established out there that would have that credibility in certain areas? Well, it's all these B2B pubs, these trade pubs that have been doing it for years and years and have built up that corpus. It's like, oh yeah, this person, this or this brand or whatever, let's say it's aviation or something, and is like, okay, so they were cited on this site that, oh, look at this pattern. It has all this aviation stuff and has a bunch of aviation experts cited all the time. That works. I'm going to take that as something credible. So I'm going to put that in the summary, like just speaking at it as sort of what an LLM would do there. So all of a sudden this becomes a very important thing in well, whatever we called it, LLMO or AIEO. So it's like the B2B publications, which are always kind of important, are now newly important, I think, if you're looking at like a comm strategy around anything.
So I actually have two questions for you on what we just talked about, what you just shared. One has to do with this credibility part, which I think is huge. Like, and I think it's an opportunity. I actually think it's probably a new market that can just, in terms of ensuring like the badge of credibility. This is real. This is not a bot. This, scoring or whatever it may be. But for for monetization, so there's credibility and there's monetization. And at Revved Up in 2025, we talked a lot about this. Like, how do media companies and publishers get compensated for this content that is fueling the LLMs? I mean, without the content and the information, there is no LLM, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they need to have these publishers creating really strong, really good, informative, deep content. Like, what have you been wrestling this with some of the people that you talk to?
Yes, I have, and I've simultaneously been observing how this is shaking out, and um, there's signals for optimism, but also signals for pessimism. So okay, so a couple sort of ground rules on what this is. One is that the AI models will go out, harvest content for training, and this is how the models are created. Um, that is a somewhat separate thing, if very conceptually similar to what is sort of called in the industry RAG, which is like real-time news, which is to say using AI for search. So, once you train a model, it's sort of done and you don't train it again for months, probably. And people want news about things that happen now from AI portals. So how do they do that? Well, they basically get some search results and then aim the LLM at it so that they can then summarize that news. So what I've just described, which is to say AI search, is turning out to actually resemble syndication more than traditional search. Because traditional search was just like, hey, yeah, I want to get in any engine I want because it's traffic. And now because there's no traffic, it's like, oh, no, I actually don't want to be in every engine because I want licensing revenue now for it. That's very loose. Like, in other words, like there's other sort of benefits to being in an AI summary that aren't necessarily just licensing revenue, but that broader sort of media revenue thinking like that's sort of where it's at. Um, so so those are sort of like number one, sort of a ground rule around what's going on. What a consequence of this is that now we're seeing sort of fragmentization. So some people have deals with OpenAI, some people have deals with Meta, some people have deals with Copilot. Perplexity is a sort of a different model, but it's all kind of a ragtag assemblage of things, whatever service you're using, which I get why that's happened. It's all, because of the way AI works and licensing and the threat of lawsuits. But it does mean from a user expectation that you probably used to have in search where just everything's on the internet and Google can access it. That's changed. You won't be able to access certain things depending on the engine you go to. That's a big change. So from the company's perspective, media companies, um, you obviously want to sort of maximize your revenue and you want to get paid for both the training data and the RAG. But the training data, that's sort of done. This was always a, kind of make nice with between big players thing in terms of the training data. Like no smaller site, mid-sized site is going to get paid for their training data. It's just kind of done. Maybe there'll be some court ruling in the future. More to say about that in a second, but like basically going forward, even I think big players aren't really being paid for training data. That's what some of the CEOs are telling me. It's the RAG that is a potential revenue source, and that's dependent on placement. These are usually metered agreements. It's like, okay, if a query used your content, then you get some fraction of a cent or whatever. And that's a decent model. It's akin to sort of royalties and again syndication. But that's probably going to be the model going forward. One of the problems is these guys can't scale, like the big portals like ChatGPT can't scale to like every single content provider on the internet. And they're so far not really motivated to. They're not incentivized because of these pending court cases, right? Like, because like, what are you going to do? Sue us? And it's like, well, some people are. And until there are some court rulings there, and this is sort of the pessimistic view I have of this, like I think we're all kind of anxious to see how these companies like Tollbits, like there's a few other Scale Post and others that have developing this system to sort of these monetized endpoints, you might call them, so that like even if you don't have a deal with OpenAI, you can put a Tollbit thing on your site, and then the crawlers that come have to pay. My understanding is mostly the AI companies are just ignoring that. They're basically like, we have crawlers, it's all the honor system. We're just going to get it. And until the courts say no, and so that's again the sort of the pessimistic view of like, until there is legal teeth behind this structure, I don't know how lucrative it's going to be. Like, it's always going to be a little money. The big players are always going to be able to get a little something because they have sway. The biggest ones will have even more sway. You look at things like News Corp, and even Reddit, which is apparently has a really valuable corpus for AI. They'll be able to sort of muscle their way a bit and have a credible threat of like, go ahead and cut us off, and we have just as much money as you to pay lawyers. But if you don't have that, I mean, it's the system needs some enforcement mechanism for it to work.
With that, it's like, well, what do I do? Because my traffic is tanking. My revenues, which is directly impacting my revenue streams. It's harder for me to get audience in general, just even to build my marketable database. What is there any? Are you advising on this on any score? Like,
I am, yes. Okay, so I give it sort of a depressing picture, and it's a little bit of all or nothing picture. The true picture is a little more sophisticated. I think some people listening probably thought, oh, it's not quite that bad. You're right, it's not that bad, because the bigger players, anyone who has a public-facing AI portal with a lot of users does need to play by some sort of rules and should not be singled out as like you're just ignoring things and doing things sort of blatantly, if not illegal, unethical. So there is an interest to play by a certain set of rules within those. And Google is actually one of these, right? So like Google has set up um, in recent years a more sophisticated system of tagging on content so that you can sort of surface snippets in search and you can pick and choose how those appear in search and AI search. Now, Google on this sort of macro level has not been great about allowing media companies to sort of opt into search but opt out of AI search. That's kind of a red line for them in that because they know a ton of people would do that, would just sort of separate the two. But at the very least, you can start getting sophisticated with your content about what is actually surfaced in the portal, and then with your data, with your content strategy and your audience team, like figuring out like, oh, what is the right way to apply this at scale across all my content to ensure I get sort of the maximum amount of audience and return. So, and for those that don't have that, all those teams, there's still sort of things you can do within that rubric. But certainly, like, the broad lesson is like, do your best to sort of get further away from click-based content. But for the people who do come, make sure you are offering um, every reason possible for them to stay, from just the quality of your content to the different experiences you're offering. Um, every media brand is really interested in events now, and that's very understandable. Um, but again, it's like any brand. It's like, okay, if you want to be an events brand, you got to consistently do great events year after year or every quarter, and then get that reputation. So it's one thing to say you want to do events. To do it, it's not just harder from a resource standpoint, it's harder from a consistency standpoint. But the thing is, you have to make these decisions and then figure it out. If you're going to have events to be a part of your strategy, it's got to be that kind of long-term commitment. And I think that's and then similarly with other sort of monetization um, paths, whatever they may be. One thing that I'm very split on is commerce. Just to sort of jump to a different topic, but it is like um, the conventional wisdom now is that kind of get out of it because it's click based. The thing is, there's two things. One is that if you are if that's your brand, like that you are like, oh, I give advice about purchasing things, whatever it is, whether it's a service, a product, etc. Um, I don't think it behooves you to sort of just get away from it. I think when people do want to purchase, like there'll be a significant amount of people that um, come to your site because a lot of the people now who are disincentivized from commerce are people who weren't that into it in the first place. So if your brand is this, I think you can still succeed. The second thing, and this is speculative, but I do think it is there's money to be made. So I think someone's going to figure it out, which is like, how does commerce work in AI? Like it's going to be similar to the licensing that we've seen, but with a little more of the traditional affiliate model sort of plugged into it somehow. Like we're already seeing these purchase things on Perplexity and whatever else, and how that sort of cut the affiliate cut is shared. Can you do things like an amalgamated link, and like, because if you only have now these really niche sites that are where their whole brand is this buying advice, that's valuable, and that's valuable to the AI answer. And so there's got to be a way to, I mean, they can already attribute things, so you could attribute it to who contributed, and then whatever commission there is can be shared. And so it's, again, theoretically, I could see exactly how you would do that. No one's built it yet. I'm sure someone will.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, like commerce isn't dead. I think it's just going on a break until certain things are figured out, and it's going to be the domain of the true specialists until then.
So with the commerce side, one part, because I was actually arguing about this with somebody a couple months ago, is there is something, and I'm talking more about more complex purchasing, where it's not just reviews you're looking for, but you're investigating, you're saving things, you're sharing them, you're researching, you're kind of looking at, specific product types and features. That that data right there is part of what has to get surfaced to, if you're like, I'm now saying, well, I want to, if I'm going to use AI, I want to go see, I'm looking for this car, let's just say. And the car is a bad example, but I'll just go with it. And I'm looking for all these features, and I'm, my age, and I'm this income bracket, and I live in this area, and I've got 3 kids. I got all this information about me, and and you collected all of this. That data right there, that behavioral data, is in itself super valuable, because if I'm going and I am a follower, I'm like, I want to find a car that people like Heather are buying because they've got all these similar attributes, and I want to know the rating. Like, how does that get like, you need that, right? Like, it just
Mm-hmm.
isn't about the car description.
Yeah, there is a whole data aspect that I think AI can help with, and I guess the issue being that now the AI company has all that data. Where was it before? In terms of this process,
It was on the site. Like, let's say it was a
right?
car site where I was going in and surfacing it, and the site was smart enough to give me a decision support tool so I could save my information.
Right.
Like, and I don't think all of that's happening on AI, because AI doesn't let you, uh, you know,
Well, you do go. I do come back to chats. Like if I have a chat about a thing, like okay, I'm working on this problem or I'm thinking about this topic, and I take a break for a few days and I come back to it, or sometimes even a few months, I'll go back to the chat and then all the context is there. So that data does exist. The problem is, I think that chat that would be hard to get out of Chat GPT. In other words, like or whatever you're using, right? So it's all just going to live in there, and maybe that just becomes a valuable data product for them. To your point about researching, and do the sites have that relationship with someone? Um, that's a good question. And this gets back to one of the original points I made of like, who's going to own that relationship? Is it going to be the portal or the site? Because I think if you're an enthusiast or you doing sort of an intense purchase, you pretty quickly figure out what are the major ones, even if you're not an expert in the field. You like if it's a car, it's like, oh, Car and Driver would know. And a few of these other brands. And you would if they offer a good experience in the same way that I sort of mentioned time is sort of betting on, um, maybe you come back to that and then it's more of a one-to-one relationship, certainly lower than like if you're going through like in terms of number of audience, lower than if you came through Google, but uh I can't see that experience being worse than Chat GPT. And here's where to the point of credibility, I think there's an opportunity here of having a sort of more generalized data set. Because yes, the Car and Driver, this is a theoretical thing, I don't know what they're offering, but like the theoretical Car and Driver AI would be trained on all Car and Driver content. But for a lot of things, like a thing you really want to research, you do want to go beyond that corpus, and but you don't necessarily want to go all the way back to the entire internet. And I think there is an opportunity, and we'll see how this shakes out. But Pro Rata is a company that's sort of trying to build this like uh, essentially a corpus. It's not a they're not training an LLM per se from scratch, but it is like they have a tremendous amount of stuff for RAG, and it's like what you would call credible media sites. And if that to me seems like a really good product for a experience like that. So if Car and Driver doesn't just have the Car and Driver data, but it also like, oh, I can also factor in all of this good, verified, human generated news and evergreen information as part of the stuff backing up your decision, then I don't have a reason to go back to ChatGPT or anything else. Then that's just enough and more credible enough so that I know I can not be assured, but like it's probably not going to hallucinate as much or go off the rails as sort of a general chatbot. I think that's helpful. And I think that would be helpful for on a lot of different sites that even though they're specialized, they sort of want when they offer an AI experience to go beyond just what they have.
Yep, absolutely. And actually, this leads me to my next question, which is, and as you've touched on it, which is opportunities for media. But maybe we just hone in on two examples I think you're very familiar with, because I found them through some of the research I did about who you're talking to. I mean, one is Reuters,
Hmm.
who's embedding AI into workflows and I think helping with a lot of the content side. And then clearly Dotdash Meredith, which through Decipher, it's one of their big investment areas, but using AI to personalize the reader experiences, deliver relevant ads, but hyper relevant across. So they're selling audience across all brands versus selling brand. Um, can you talk a little bit about more those two use cases?
Yeah, Reuters in particular, I think is a smart way they've sort of embraced AI, and they do it in a very sort of methodical way. And even just taking a realistic look at using AI in media, and journalism specifically, whatever you're doing, even if you don't think it's like something the newsroom should have anything to do with, the newsroom is going to have thoughts on it. You know what I mean? Like, and journalists are very skeptical of AI. I mean, that's I'm not telling any tales out of school there. And there's a lot to admire in their approach and the approach of some other sort of major media brands who are deploying audience experiences and internal tools. And it's very much a game of persuasion, of just making sure that the editorial teams feel heard. They don't feel threatened by it, even though there's a sort of a looming uber threat to AI, no matter what. But if they see more and more like what AI can do for them, they can sort of become more acclimated to it. So that's sort of number one. Like, communicate good, just practice good communication and good team building with when you're working on this stuff. But generally, the Reuters approach of having it kind of be this modular thing that you can attach to certain processes, and sub it in here, sub it in there, um, and making it sort of very clear what those use cases are. Um, I think it's very smart. I think it's the way they organize it. Oh, I forget the buckets now, but it's like augment efficiency, and like they basically they organize it around sort of like what broadly in AI, like, it's like, are you creating efficiencies? Are you creating new things entirely? um and there, I think there's sort of one other in there that's sort of in between. And so again, like, having that strategy of like, what is this for? Never be doing AI for the sake of AI. There should be some thing you hope to gain out of it, and preferably something you can measure. I do think in business there's a lot of infatuation with a stat like revenue per employee. um, I don't think that's probably a great one in media. And I think, um, but I do think there's an audience equivalent in terms of like, are we seeing better engagement from whatever audience we have? Because it's, again, with search going away, I don't know if you're going to see certainly the same kind of growth, but like that, um, maybe it's a lifetime customer value thing or something. I'm not sure. Um, and the sorry, what was the other example again? There was Reuters and, oh, Dotdash Meredith. Yeah. So they're really they've been on top of this for a while, and I really admire that they have pivoted quite a bit already away from a Google based um, economy. Like, basically their revenue now, in terms of like what's generated from Google and clicks, is much lower than it was a couple of years ago. So they're not getting caught by this flat footed. Their Decipher product, the whole idea of personalization, um, I think it's very, very smart. I think what I sort of just described, what ProRata is doing, they're one of the few brands that are into so many things. They could do a version of that themselves, and they are essentially. So ensuring that like the data from all of their brands and the things they can put in front of a reader, or someone engaging with them, is they just have a lot of options open to them. So um, yeah, I really like admire what they're doing with that. And I just think both of those brands, they have sort of radically different audiences, with Dotdash being more about sort of this evergreen content, and a lot of transactional things. And like I say, um, I think that's calling for a certain amount of rethinking, and I think there's rethinking it sort of brand by brand, and but they have an engine that can kind of ensure they're making the most of every click, which is it helps them a lot. And then Reuters, of course, they're just it's all about getting the news accurately enough and fast enough to the people that care about it, and so everything I think they're doing is in further of that goal.
So, and that's a great distinction, by the way, and both business models there, yes, they're media, but they are incredibly distinct in terms of the difference. Each has their own risks, by the way.
Hmm.
I think Reuters might be, to a certain degree, somewhat more at risk because if news can be replicated that easily, so
What I'd say, like, of the brands, the news media brands out there, that if you're a major AI engine, like who would you want to partner with to make sure you have the most comprehensive, fastest, and most
it's true.
accurate information? They're in the top three.
Yep.
And I forget actually if it's Meta or Microsoft. They have some kind of deal with them, and so basically some of these AI engines that don't even seem to be all that interested in licensing deals might want to license with them just to have a news component.
The credible news. That's a very great point. Which actually, Dotdash also, we had Jonathan Roberts at RevDev, but I think I saw you
Oh,
interviewed
he's
him.
awesome.
I know he's really just wildly intelligent.
Yeah.
You're just like, wait, what? um,
When I talk to him, I always want to just nerd out with him about like string theory or something. He just
yeah,
knows so much about not just media but science.
yep. So, um, the Dotdash deal that they made with one, I think it's ChatGPT, and it was what, 16 million or something along those lines. But
Hmm.
one of the big discussion points among the attendees in the audience was, well, wait a minute, is that actually the value of what you license? Is that the correct monetary value for the amount of data? Because it actually felt small, and what's your thought about these licensing deals? Do you feel like they're shooting themselves in the foot? Do you think it's just we don't know and it's all going to shake out?
Well, is it too small? Is it too big? I mean, stuff's worth what people are willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
And the way, with these deals, you can look at it from a number of different ways, but the two most relevant ones are like, okay, um, what is it worth to Chat GPT or whoever? And Nick Thompson actually at the Atlantic has some really good sort of back of the envelope math of like, okay, OpenAI is worth so many billion, so many 100 billion. The models cost this much or whatever, and all the content on the internet was this much, and then the media is probably this much of that, and then what's the Atlantic share of that, and then divide that by whatever. And so we sort of arrived at a figure of like what it's actually worth to Chat GPT. And, that sort of became a point of negotiation. But then there's the other side of it, which is to say, like, well, if this traffic that is all being ingested, like basically people going to ChatGPT and getting the information just from there and not coming, what is the value of that number of people coming to my site and looking at ads or whatever? And so then that's your value from the publisher side. And then so this is sort of where I would say like, well, take this stat and this stat, try to find if how much that matches up, and then it's probably somewhere in the middle, whatever that ends up being. Um, but at the end of the day, like I say, stuff's worth what people will pay for it. There's nuances, like there is still some click through from some of these search engines. It's tiny. There was actually just some data that came out yesterday, I think from Tollbit, that showed just the fraction of a percent that it is compared to what it was before. But supposedly it is higher quality. So like in other words, this is someone who really wants to engage with your brand and is probably going to buy a subscription or buy something or whatever. Um, so you kind of factor in all of that. Um, but ultimately, like you got to sort of find a figure that makes sense, and then hopefully size your business accordingly. I would hope that you could do that equation again and again with all the AI providers, um, whatever they are. Like again, there's always these tech companies are so big, and to some extent, all companies, but certainly media, are dependent on them. So there's a reluctance to sue. I mean, there's a reason people are suing ChatGPT and Perplexity, but not Google. Not Apple. I mean, Apple's barely doing anything here, but I mean, Apple's a massive platform. And at some point, let's be clear, Apple's had stumbles. They're in a not a great period with AI right now. They will figure it out. I've been covering Apple for 20 plus years. Um, I don't see their devices going away anytime soon. We'll probably still all have iPhones in 2030, and they'll have some AI strategy that makes sense. So Apple is a player, and they will be a very relevant to the media and everyone doing stuff here in terms of, people finding content, getting content summarized, and discovering it. So all of that is definitely coming.
Well, I thought it was ironic that Cook came out and started talking about how like all the flaws with AI and everything. And I said, well, they just must not have their act together right now, which is why he has this position.
Yeah, that study was a little bit embarrassing. They should just keep quiet about AI until they have something.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
when they have it, great. We'll love it. Well, maybe we'll not love it, but we'll count what you're saying as something.
Perfect. Well, listen, we're still in the early days, and I think this is what's going to help. Our discussions will help our audience figure out what to do. And Pete, just talk about who your customers are and how, because I think you actually, it's not just media. You have, you work with, PR companies.
That's right.
Who should be reaching out to you if they need assistance?
Honestly, like the net I cast is like, if you're interested in content creation, content discovery, media, and how AI can help, either as an individual, like literally your workflows, or as an organization, like how should I be thinking about this and deploying it? I'm happy to help. Please give me a call. I have courses that people can just buy on the website. I give a monthly 1 hour intro to AI. It's narrowly focused, like you said, on media, PR, and comms. So it's about use cases and how to think of it from those professions. But you're definitely going to walk away with at least something that you can start doing right away. It's not just like theory. Here's how your AI mindset or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a little of that, of course. You got to be level set, but it is like, I want to get people to the good stuff as quickly as possible when I do these courses. And then when I do trainings with PR firms or newsrooms, speaking to B2B media, those are one of my best clients, as well as lots of PR firms of all sizes, everything from boutiques to sort of larger organizations and big teams that are global. I try to make it very workshopy. I try to make sure people are getting their hands on their tools, and that I'm showing them something new and interesting every time, which is the biggest challenge. I've got to stay current on all of this stuff. It's kind of hard to believe 6 months ago I wasn't even teaching deep research, and now it's like fundamental to so many of my lessons because it's such a massively useful tool in both of those professions. So yeah, like it's like I say, my courses are available on the site, mediacopilot.ai. If you want something a little more custom, give me an email and we can work something out.
Perfect. And I actually checked out one of your courses, and I'm not a content expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm like, I'm signing up. They really look fabulous, by the way. So
thank you.
I recommend our audience check it out. So, but before we close out, I always like to do 3 rapid fire questions. And we start with the book one because we're starting a book club for our membership. So what's your best recommended book? And you don't have to have, you don't need to be reading it now. It's any book that just pops up to mind.
So I want to recommend something because my son actually got me on this book, which he really likes. It's kind of one of these youth fiction ones, but it's really surprisingly, amazingly good. It's called Red Rising. And it's sort of in the same vein as a lot of these things, whether it's like kind of like the Hunger Games, but those kind of franchises. But this one is so twisty and interesting. It's definitely like sci-fi, but it's just sort of like a really fun, somewhat dark twist on that whole idea. It gets a little meta even sometimes. I really liked it. So Red Rising, it's a whole book series, but that's the first book.
Awesome. And what's the strangest editorial project you've ever worked on?
Oh, wow. Okay. Like could I say everything at CoinDesk?
Yeah.
The crypto world was nuts. There was a project there that I was assigned. I had to do something where we wanted people not to just think of Bitcoin as the thing to transact in, but like Satoshis, which is a fraction of a Bitcoin. We wanted to sort of turn Sats into a thing. It just, spoiler alert, it wasn't a thing. So that was weird. Oh, you know what though? At Mashable, this is interesting. I don't really, I haven't talked about this in a long time. We actually had Newt Gingrich review the Apple Watch when I was at Mashable. So
Wow.
that was super fun. That might be the strangest one. It ended up being like a great article he wrote. We did this is kind of interesting given the political climate today. Like this was in the heyday of like not the heyday, but like maybe the last vestiges of some bipartisanship in Washington.
Right.
And we actually made a video where it's kind of a comedy. It's still online somewhere at the Mashable website, where he's walking around Washington and I like Cory Booker has a walk-on cameo and he kind of like he's like tech support guy. It was really funny to do to get Newt Gingrich and his friends in Washington to kind of make a video for us.
Oh, I think that sounds super awesome and fun.
Yeah,
So
I should put that in the show notes. I'll send you the link.
absolutely. And my last one is, have you ever been on TV and why?
I've been on TV, yeah, a little bit. I'm occasionally called in for Fox Business or CNN to give some commentary on tech or AI, sometimes crypto. And it's always a good experience. But my favorite TV appearance was it was actually the Today Show. And this was a while back, but it was talking about when the Xbox One was new, and I got to sort of nerd out a little bit with the hosts about cool games and stuff like that. That was sort of around Christmas time, but that was about 10 years ago. But it was super fun.
Pete, your insights have been incredibly valuable for anyone navigating this space, and we'll make sure to put all of your information of how they can contact you in the show notes, along with the Newt Gingrich video. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Revenue Room podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
For our listeners, if today's conversation about data-driven media and AI-powered platforms resonated with you, I want to invite you to join Revenue Room Connect, our professional network for CEOs and their revenue-critical leadership teams leading businesses in the media, data, and experience economy. Please visit www.revenueroomconnect.com. Quick save the date announcement. Revved Up will be March 23rd through the 24th at the Vinoy in St. Pete. Ping me on LinkedIn for more information if you're interested and want to learn more.